So I'm Writing a Novel is the show where you join me, Oliver Brackenbury, on the journey of writing my next novel, from first ideas all the way to publication and promotion. In this one-man reality show, I'll share with you my ever-evolving thoughts and feelings on how I write, being a writer, and everything that entails at each stage of the process. I'll also interview special guests involved in writing and publishing. If you're the kind of person who likes to learn how things are made and get to know the people making them, then this is the show for you. I'd like to say a quick thank you to our Patreon supporters who make this show possible. Patrons get to listen to episodes of the show early and gain access to a treasure trove of bonus content that I'm regularly adding to, including over 70 bonus episodes, the TV pilot screenplay I wrote with the novel's character, and more. Please check it out at patreon.com/soimwritinganovel. Unless this is your very first episode of the show, you are probably already familiar with the fact that writing the novel led to the podcast led to getting to know other people in the Sword Sorcery scene, which eventually led to me doing a magazine and then books and publishing. Oh boy, wow. Yeah. I don't know why I slid into making the kinds of noises I make for my dog, but anyway, you're welcome. So yes, that path has included becoming curious about other people who are independently publishing that are not focused on Sword and Sorcery, but especially when people who don't focus on Sword and Sorcery decide to dip their toes in. Well, that brings us to Neon Hemlock Press, a Washington, D.C. based small press publishing speculative fiction, rad zines, and queer chapbooks. Publishers Weekly once called Neon Hemlock the apex of queer speculative fiction publishing. The publisher and editor of Neon Hemlock Press is Dave Ring, and he's got a new Kickstarter going for their latest book, Shatter the Sun, Queer Tales of Untold Adventure, an anthology of pulp heroism in conversation with Samuel R. Delaney's Neverone, Conan and Red Sonja, Imaro, and Xena. It will contain stories of queer heroes forged and tempered in the fire, fighting dark stars and bright suns and overthrowing tyranny in all its forms. As of my recording this introduction, the crowdfund has 16 days to go. It is currently October 29th, 2024. So let's not waste any time. Let's get to the interview. And if you want to check out the thing on Kickstarter, you can just go to Kickstarter and search for Shattered Suns. Of course, I promise it's the only one, but you can also find the link right at the very top of the description of this episode. Okay, let's go talk to Dave about himself, Neon Hemlock Press, and the new anthology. And here I am with Dave from Neon Hemlock Press. Hey Dave, how's it going?
Hey, thanks for having me.
It's really fun to get to meet you properly because you and I have chatted a little bit in DMs on Discord. I've seen you around. I've also universally heard people speak very well of both yourself and your press and the books you guys put out, which certainly look very cool to me. I'm definitely going to have to start looking at what I can order for myself. But for those who have never heard of you or met you before, would you mind giving a little introduction of yourself and maybe what is Neon Hemlock and what can people expect generally from it?
Sure. So Neon Hemlock is a speculative press based here in Washington, D.C. I started up in late 2019, so I'm coming right up on my 5-year anniversary. And we publish predominantly queer speculative fiction with a emphasis on novellas and anthologies. There's a few other sort of like ephemera or like liminal pieces. Like we also do a bunch of zines and chapbooks. The key thing is so far no novels. So, and then underneath the auspices of Neon Hemlock, I also publish a flash fiction magazine called Baffling, where the tagline for that is what is the tagline? The tagline is speculative flash fiction with a queer bent. And so we're coming up on, I guess I must have started that quickly after the press because I think we're about 4.5 years into Baffling now. So
2019, did you find the pandemic helped?
No, gosh. Yeah, so the first novellas I put out came out April 2020, and that was a really poor timing. Um, I think in some ways, having this project for me softened the blow of the pandemic because I had something to pour myself into that was new and complicated and had a lot of areas that I needed to learn. But no, I can't say that it was a great time. The first anthology I put out was one of post apocalyptic fiction, and it felt far too real. And I
Yeah, like
think
too soon.
yeah, and I was reading and selecting those stories after the pandemic started, and I think it definitely made the tone of the anthologies skew more hopeful, just because I didn't have stomach for some of the darker material that maybe I would have enjoyed at another time.
I'm guessing any plague related submissions, you were kind of like, I don't know, like looking at them a little different.
There's only like a couple that were sort of going that way, and unless they were something that I was considering beforehand, they didn't make it in. I didn't have the stomach for it.
Fair enough. Now, of course, it's easy to make a joke about it being like that was your learning to bake bread or whatever of the pandemic. But like you say, you started it just before. So, what was your inspiration to like go, hey, I'm going to start an independent press. This is something I want to do.
Oh well, the short version is necessity. So at the time, I was the chair of a queer literary festival in DC, and I'd had the great idea to have this chapbook competition, yeah, with categories in fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. And I sort of thought I had like a gentle person's agreement with someone to print them, but I had misunderstood, and all of a sudden I realized that I had to print some chapbooks. So,
Oh.
and as part of that, it's just sort of snowballed from there because I had edited an anthology with a small press the year before, and I figured, well, if I'm publishing these chapbooks, I might as well do my own anthology, and now it's like 50 books later. So
Fair enough. So I'm also curious. You mentioned that you steer clear of novels. Is there any? Is that maybe just like a dry business decision kind of thing, or is it like
I think it's
a
probably a
moral?
bad business decision. The more I think about it, it's sort of like maybe a misinformed principle. Um, but there's some practical parts to it too. As much as there's a big market for novels was my initial thought, and then I didn't need to be trying to um, make waves in a market that was already daunting and huge. But there's just so many of the logistics of the industry are geared towards this form that I decided from get that I would just avoid. So it's sort of like setting myself at hard mode right from the beginning of things. So I do regret it sometimes, and I do occasionally hear of a project and think to myself, I wonder if that should be my first foray into longer form fiction.
Well, it's funny, because like I didn't make any plans myself going into first my magazine and now with books this year, but I was to avoid novels consciously or anything. It's just kind of like I'm gonna do, I do Sword Sorcery. Short stories are kind of the form for that. Okay, let's start with a magazine. Plus, I just love magazines and layout and all that kind of stuff, right? Art direction is one of my favorite things. Um, and not to talk about me, but my point is simply that it's been funny as I've been, I'm a little baby. I only started 2 years ago, and I'm still learning a lot. And I keep seeing people being like, "Yeah, magazines are basically like the double black diamond, ski hill of like doing this, and anthologies don't make money, and novellas, you might as well do a novel because it's about the same And I'm just kind of like, shit, what have I
Yeah,
done? At the same
yeah,
time, you get drawn to the formats that like do it for you, and there are reasons that I personally find, in weird ways, the anthology and the magazine simpler. Even though they anthologies and the magazine, even though they involve like so many more collaborators than a single author and like a cover artist.
yeah. The logistics of an anthology are daunting. I think if the process of putting one together wasn't also exhilarating, the daunting logistics would definitely get more in the way. Um, and I have told myself that I should do less of them because they take up a lot of brain space and bandwidth and all the rest of it. But they're just a lot of fun to put together, and I think they're an opportunity for an editor to be more in the driver's seat with a book. So maybe there's a selfish kind of ego-driven part to it as well, where it's fun to decide what sort of sandbox you want to play with, and then ask people to join you, as opposed to going the other route and just waiting to see what submissions you get.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. I think having a lot of control over a project is very seductive. Like, I'm only just now doing open subs. The first bunch of issues for the magazine, I was like, commissions only. I will control things. You will be in the magazine. You will be in the magazine. All right, I'm just like, yeah. And it wasn't even about like the thing that people often understandably complain about. I wasn't just like getting all my friends. It was just about like I had goals for the voice of the thing, and I wanted to control over that voice. I felt like with open subs, I'd have to be like, well, I hope I get what I need, to like say what I
No,
want
I
to
can
say.
understand. I can understand that. Yeah.
So yeah, and I mean for anthologies, like I mean, I'm assuming you're picking the themes. So there you go, right from the the get go, right? There's that.
Yeah, there's a little bit of like small room, reaching out to friends saying, "Here's two vibes I'm considering. Which one sounds more interesting to you?" So there's a lot of litmus checking, and in small rooms full of smart people. But yeah, it's ultimately me. I was gonna say driving the train. I'm really bad with mixing my metaphors, but
right.
yeah,
Like flying the Subaru, yeah.
Right. But yeah. But for what it's worth, I think with open submissions, there's a thrill to open submissions that quickly won me over in terms of just you start reading a piece, you don't know the name of the person, and you're really surprised at like the reaction that the opening sentences give you. And then if I find myself like cussing at a story as I go, like that's when I know that I'm really into it,
Listeners, you can't see. I just made a very excited kind of Muppet face and gestures when Dave said the cussing thing. So we just were doing our first open submissions for the magazine, and I literally read a manuscript in bed last night. And at the end of it, I have this. Sometimes you do things and you're like, oh, that's probably made up when you were younger and you heard people say it, but then you do it and you're like, oh, okay, it's real. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I've been holding, and I said, and as I let out that breath, I went, holy shit.
Oh, because they stuck the landing, right?
Yeah. And the whole thing really have been super intense, but then boom, stuck the landing on top of that. And and then I was like, oh, I guess people do that. I guess people do the breathe out, holy shit.
That expression has been my bugbear since people started complaining about it, because I do it all the time. And so whenever people describe that as a fake thing, it makes me wonder if maybe they should get out more and experience more.
Well, yeah, or just not. Sometimes I think people just kind of like to pick on things that feel cliche or whatever, or they think things that are very common or somehow therefore inauthentic.
But it reminds me too of, have you heard people when they say I'm framing this incorrectly, but short version is inner monologues. Like there was this big complaint at one point about inner monologues of folks saying, why are they doing them? They're so fake. And then, of course, a whole bunch of people chimed in and were like, what are you talking about? I have an inner monologue. And it was just another example of, brains work differently. And it would be useful if people would pipe down before assuming that their experience is the only experience.
Well, yeah. And also, of course, so much of it is just like trends coming and going, and everybody in quotation marks agreeing, like, yeah, nobody does, as you say, like inner monologues. Who does that? And like Dashiell Hammett's ghost is like, hey, or whatever. Well, not that you have to go to the dead to get these things, but you get my point.
Sure.
Yeah. Oh well. But yeah, no, the open submissions in that sense, I completely agree, are really fun. So I mean, right now I'm kind of doing a hybrid, and we'll see how long I stick with that. But so would that open submission thrill you describe be what you were saying, meaning a moment ago when you said like you find anthologies kind of thrilling and that helps push back against the challenges? Or is there something else?
I do. Despite or in addition to that thrill, I think that solicitations are pretty important for an anthology as well, because they signal to other people, either readers or potential writers, what sort of themes or how you're approaching whatever the anthology is. So I think for all the books I've done, except the very first one, I've had a core of 5 to 12 solicitations that I've like nailed down before opening to everybody else. And sometimes there's a couple like delayed reaction ones of folks that like I'm trying to peer pressure into writing me a thing, but I don't make them like guarantee it. But it's just like, listen, if a story comes of this later, I will be delighted to accept it. But yeah, the combination of those two things, I think, is part. They're tools in my toolbox for how I approach anthologies. Like both, like nail down the theme with people that you are excited with how they're going to approach it, and then also incorporate open submissions so that you get to the thrill of surprise as well.
All right, cool. So meanwhile, crowdfunding I know is something you've done before for your novella line or other projects. It's part of your whole publishing apparatus to some degree. Well, what I'd like to ask is, we could talk like 5 hours about crowdfunding. So just broadly speaking, what do you find most challenging and perhaps most rewarding about using it to get your books out?
I don't know that there's anything about it especially that is challenging beyond in order to use it effectively, I have to fight against my own disinterest in being perceived. So there's like just the sort of marketing sales angle of a small press is probably the hardest part for me, along with accounting. And it's sort of one of the albatrosses around my neck as largely one person operation. But in the lead up to a Kickstarter, the putting together of all the assets and the setting up of the platform and all of those sort of discrete steps. At this point, I think I'm on my 11th one, maybe 15th if I count the Indiegogo campaigns that I did the year and a half that Kickstarter was flirting with cryptocurrency. So that part I don't think is hard. You do have to make yourself talk about your project more often than perhaps most people are comfortable with. And I don't know. There's some parts of it that I seem to do reasonably well and that the things get funded. And then there's some parts that are definitely harder for me. Like fulfillment can get messy. I end up giving myself too many spreadsheets, and I've had to eat crow and email people and say, hey, let me know if you didn't get this thing because I didn't track it as well enough as I should. So those things definitely happen, and I don't want to act like I have totally figured it out. But in terms of the fundraising part, I'm grateful that I've got enough of I don't know if following is the word, but at least readership that I can usually pull off whatever I need to make a project happen. And at this point, I think I'm figuring out where to make them more efficient, what rewards people don't really go for, and how to actually pay myself what I need in order to make a project happen. Yeah,
it is fun finding out the hard way that actually X is a little more expensive, or did you know about B? You got to get B. And you're like, oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah. When, I don't know, one of the Kickstarters I did, the price of shipping nearly doubled in the time between fundraising and fulfillment. So I unexpectedly lost I don't know, it was more than $1,000, but I forgot how much it was. But so there are definitely expenses that sneak up on you. You can't really build in that. I guess maybe that's the thing that makes me more grassrootsy and less effective, is that I don't build that kind of a buffer into my pricing.
I mean, is there anything you like about it? Like, I think I'm kind of a freak in this regard, but I sort of enjoy crowdfunding. I like turning it into almost like a little party, even though it still has its stresses and whatnot. Don't get me wrong.
Oh, I mean, sorry, I didn't mean to make it seem like I didn't like it.
Oh no, you're allowed to. You're allowed to like it.
That's not what I'm trying to say. I guess it's not something that goes with my default way of being, but that doesn't mean it's not effective. And I think it's probably singularly the thing that has allowed me to be as successful as I am. Because if I look at just my website sales or my distribution sales, they're probably total a third of my business, and then my Kickstarter sales are the other 2/3. So, even even considering everything else, they're still my most effective way of reaching readers.
Yeah, I really do think the independent publishing scene would look smaller if not for crowdfunding. Because yeah, for all its frustrations and if you don't like, as you say, being perceived, which I mean, fair, a lot of people don't. Um, you know, you kind of having to go against the grain there to promote yourself. Yeah, it just gives opportunities for promotion, including passive promotion, which is nice. That are hard to do if you're just a person with a website, somehow trying to get by 100% on direct sales or direct and like trying to get your stuff found in the massive ocean of flotsam on Amazon, let's say. Uh, yeah, like it's not. I don't think it's like the only thing, or it's a silver bullet or whatever. But I don't know. I can't imagine like independent publishing and in general, whether it's comics or genre fic and so on, without it being anywhere near the size that it is. I know people did it before, but it just yeah, I don't know. I don't know how people got funds. I don't know how people raised like let's say, I don't know, pick a number on my butt here, 12 grand to get a thing printed if they didn't have a rich uncle or something, like,
But I do think that is the state of most small businesses. Like they're not being started by people who are just scraping by. Like they are. I think that's our myth of American exceptionalism causing us problems again. Thinking that that's the case, because most businesses don't succeed, right? So I don't think that. Sorry, that's kind of a miserable point to make.
yeah, no, but you're right. I mean, and then honestly, we can take that from that unfortunate thing around to a positive thing because, yeah, I've seen people put it. I'm butchering this a little bit, but somebody said something to the effect of like, if you're trying to get a business to succeed and carry forward into longevity, that's kind of like trying to get a bullseye on the dartboard. And it's like middle class people maybe get like one or two throws, and if they're lucky, they nail it and they off they go. Rich people can just like throw darts all day, and that's obviously what makes things simpler for them. And then poor people don't get to throw. They're lucky if they get one throw. And I think crowdfunding allows people who are not of means to get another throw or two.
Right, because so many of the kind of like we were talking about earlier about how the industry is framed or like set up for books, and if you're trying to do something else, you're making it hard for yourself. The industry is also set up for large publishers. So
Yep.
when you're trying to exist in the space between self pub POD and trad pub big five, you're kind of Goldilocksing it everywhere you go, and it's not easy to figure out what the right path is for you.
So on that note, would there be? And I'm just going to put you on the spot here. Sorry. Would there be? You said you've done 15 total crowdfunds overall. Any advice that isn't obvious? What's something maybe odd that cropped up in a campaign, which maybe you didn't expect to learn, and then you're like, oh, geez, okay, I got to do that every campaign going forward, or avoid that every campaign.
I don't know if I have any like single tips. I just have lots of little ones that have sort of accumulated. Like have an early bird rate for your or something to incentivize people joining early. Make graphics for your story and spend some time on how it looks. Actually make a video, even if it doesn't necessarily isn't needed. It's just some people really respond to video. Make sure that you can launch ahead of time and try to get a handful of people ready to go the day you launch without having to do day of marketing. None of them are. I mean, you said silver bullets earlier. None of them are like
Oh no,
instant fixes.
I was saying I don't expect you to give me a silver bullet, but just kind of like I find like there's little things like I did a little bit of crowdfunding a long time ago for indie film, and like we're talking on Indiegogo in like 2010 when filthy Canadians were not allowed on Kickstarter.
All right.
And then I kind of didn't need to crowdfund anything for a long time, and now I've gotten back on it the last 2 years. First Kickstarter, and then I hopped over to BackerKit for a bunch of reasons. And yeah, it's just there are little things that I find I've noticed that I didn't expect to notice. But what you're saying is perennial good advice. Yeah, I mean, I do think it's surprising how many people will launch a campaign without having had the like follow this campaign page, to try and build up a bunch of people, as you say, who want to leap on it day one kind of thing. Is there anything you like ever deeply regret having done on a crowdfund? You're like, I never again. Like that was a bad idea, or that seemed good, but then oof, boy, the way it played out.
I think just thinking about what you can ship together. Like I calculated the shipping for one project without actually looking into whether boxes existed that could hold the thing that I was saying I would put in a box, and then discovered that none of the boxes I usually used would do that, and I had to spend an extra however many $100 on a different kind of box and different filling. It's just all those little. It's like death by a thousand cuts with some of the logistical issues. So I guess I don't know.
Plan in advance, plan carefully. Sounds like.
Yeah, run it by people who've done it in the real world, I guess, is my advice, because they'll know some of the steps that your brain has glossed over.
It's funny. I mean, I know you just probably mean like a certain size of box, but you're like talking about shipping something specifically that the previous box couldn't do, and I'm just imagining like, I don't know, a badger. Like it's just like you got to get the proper badger box, man. It's the
Absolutely.
only way. It's the only way.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I mean, like I said, I'll talk about crowdfunding all night long. I have the part of your brain that's like, play the video game, play it for 10 hours. For some reason, that part of my brain activates with crowdfunding. So we'll move on quickly, lest we spend 10 hours on it. But,
Sure.
at the end of the day, like this podcast, it started originally as me talking about writing my novel. It was an SNS novel. And so that's one of the reasons my eyebrow shot up when I saw the anthology. So as we sort of start zeroing in on it, I'd love to ask, and this is not a comic book shop guy gatekeeping thing. There's no wrong answer. I just want to know your story. What is your relationship to Sword and Sorcery? Is it something, somebody shoved you down in front of Conan 1982, as a kid? Or is it something you found like 10 minutes ago and went, it looks fun? Or where are you at with it? What's your origin story with SNS?
Yeah, I don't think that I have great nerd cred with my SNS pedigree, as it were.
This interview is over. No, correct.
I came into Sword. Well, I think as a young person, I was consuming it alongside the rest of the genre as someone who was just always obsessed with fantasy and science fiction. And I grew up watching my dad play the gold box D&D games, and then as a teenager playing Dark Sun, which I will allege is a little recognized cornerstone of the genre.
No, man, Dark Sun is cool. Very cool. Very post-apocalyptic D&D setting. Great art. The artist's name escapes me, of course. Braum?
It's Braum. Yeah, it's Braum. Yeah. So Braum is maybe a third of my Sword and Sorcery, I'll say obsession, but like the way that man draws quads alone should bring you into the field. But,
Mighty thews, right? SNS. You gotta have thews.
Yeah, I think there's even like a joke about how there's a webpage that sort of just has Braum saying, all these characters saying, "Oh, Brahm's coming by. You better stand and make sure you flex your quads." But
it's funny to imagine different SNS artists having like their preferred muscle groups. Like Braum's got quads, Frazetta's have got glutes up the yin yang. I always love. There was a long Twitter post that someone did where they were like, say what you will about the objectification of people in various SNS artists, take on the genre. Frazetta was very equal opportunity about ass, and just shows like orcs with like cheeks clapping as they charge across in his Lord of the Rings drawings, for example. But anyway, sorry, carry on. I'm just
well, there's something there about there's like a sidebar we could make about nerds being obsessed with a genre that like focuses on this physicality, and obviously there's swole nerds. I'm not acting like there isn't, but there's something. As a former very scrawny teenager who was obsessed with this, I think there's something interesting there. But yeah, so
aspirational bodies, whether it be musculature or sexual desire or whatever. Yeah, it's all there. It's all in the mix.
Yeah, I guess there's a handful of power fantasies that we can be having there, right? And so the other point of entry for me with the genre is Samuel Delaney's Novarion books, which I know are coming at it from this like. I'm gonna say postmodern, but my my sociology degree is 20 years old at this point, so I won't back it up too carefully. And just using the trappings of sword and sorcery to tell other kinds of stories, and then using the trappings of other stories but approaching it with a sword and sorcery mentality. I'd like when you get under the hood of something and start to take it apart. So
well, and I think it totally counts. I'm not super familiar with those texts, but I have good friends and authors I work with I trust who have sung the praises. I have an idea, and I'm going to read it sooner or later. But to what you're saying about, like, yeah, how he like kind of uses SNS to get at this or this to get at SNS, either one way or the other. I feel like that's something you can find in some of the best works, even going back to Robert E. Howard. A book reviewer I know, Robin Marks, often says that good old, Robert E. Howard would drape SNS like a cloak over other genres. If you look through Conan stories, go to the Urtext, right, you'll find like SNS Western Frontier, SNS Hard-Boiled Mystery, SNS Locked Room Murder Mystery, SNS Pirates. So I think like what Delaney was doing is totally legit. You don't need to qualify it.
And I had these questions with some of the folks that I was soliciting to work with me for this anthology when they were presenting pitches for stories, and a couple times I had to ask for the focus of the story to be more human and more shades of gray and less epic.
Well, hey, that gets me to a question I wanted to ask you because, again, not to talk about me, but just like there's some overlap here. So coming from what I'm doing, right? Like I have a few goals with my publishing at SNS, and one of the big ones is the fact that in the like 30 odd years, it kind of laid fallow between the collapse in the mid to late 80s and like this kind of a nascent third wave coming about the last few years. I'm kind of excited about. It seems like it went from being defined as kind of a clunky genre to kind of just parodies of it to kind of people forgetting. I mean, various authors never forgot, but I mean, the audience at large, right? Kind of forgetting like the difference between, say, your Conan and your Lord of the Rings. Like, I think SMS to a lot of people, even now, became and is just a synonym for fantasy. Just wizards and shit, and without thought to maybe more specific stuff. So I always think it's kind of interesting. Again, not the comic book shop guy gatekeeping, but I think it's fun to talk to people who are putting out projects like this. And I would love to hear you elaborate, please, on how do you define sword and sorcery as a unique fantasy subgenre? What does it mean to you in terms of like tropes or whatever?
Well, I'm gonna cheat and answer this backwards first.
Right.
So the book I put out before this was a queer gothic horror anthology, and I already, because that's a TOC I've already put together, and I had to look at stories from the perspective of were they subverting the gothic, or had they gone so far that they were no longer gothic and they were some other genre, and part of that meant things like if you're going to have outliers from the genre, you sort of want to consider them in conjunction with the core of the genre. And if you have too many outliers, is the book even still a gothic horror book? So I think that's how I'm planning on approaching the table of contents for this upcoming book, which is that I love subversions of genre, but I need the core of it to feel like what I feel like Sword and Sorcery is. And not having assembled that, I think that it's what I've said a moment ago around more small-scale human conflict, but also I guess I'm just hoping it'll have like in the call for submissions, I think I called it a vein of the occult running through it. There's a sort of there's an approach to the fantastic and magic that I feel like if you go past it, you veer into that epic territory. So that's something that I'll be thinking about. And I am one of the suggestions for a antagonist in the stories was going to be something like a dragon. And I had to sort of put the brakes on and ask for it to look differently. Not that there can't be a dragon in a SNS story, but when I'm thinking about the solicited folks, I'm trying to hew closely to the core of what I think of SNS, and that's usually a more human obstacle as opposed to something the size of a small town.
Or even if it is, fantastic, do you find I myself do, I tend to think more about weird with a capital W, weird fiction. I tend to think more about like non-standardized fantastic elements, so maybe not something that I would recognize from the D&D monster manual. I want people to, yeah, well, even if it's big or small scale, um I want something that doesn't feel like, oh, okay, it's this thing. It might be scary, but you understand that you kill it with a +1 sort of, you know. like, I mean, I'm being a bit of a goon because I'm expressing strong opinions, but yeah, it sounds like it's heartening to hear what you're saying because it sounds like um, I'm trying to avoid saying my opinions as if they're empirical facts, which is very easy when you're discussing genre and what you think it should be.
Yeah,
But
and
it's
I guess I also have that same temptation to put a hard line on genre. I guess the reason I'm hesitating there is I love being surprised by a text that feels perfectly in the genre, but also defies some of the rules that I consider important to it. So I was talking with a colleague of mine, Marianne Kirby, the other day about genre, and it's too bad I'm already mangling what she said, but the idea of oh nope, it's lost. Anyway, Marianne Kirby has a great thought about what genre is. It has something to do with how it's the man. Maybe I was indulging too much that night because I was thinking about like streetlights and something about like the center. It's not so much the walls that define it, but like what holds it together. I'm screwing it up,
Well,
but
no, I mean, well, here, let me see if I can build on that, and then if it helps you get back to what you were trying to remember, tell me to shut up. But it's like I think about this a lot because I've seen too many arguments online about like, is this story sword and sorcery? Is it not? Is this sparkling high fantasy or whatever? And my personal favorite definition, which I'm not going to rattle off here, comes from a book, Brian Murphy's Flame and Crimson: A History of Sword and Sorcery, which is a great book I recommend. And the reason it's my favorite definition, one of the reasons, is it's flexible. He basically says here are 7 common attributes of SNS. If there are enough of them present in what you're reading or writing to make you feel that it is sword and sorcery, then congratulations, you're writing or reading sword and sorcery. Every other description, every other, pardon me, definition I see, and some of them I do really like, are very, hard and fast. It is this, that is it, you know? So the idea of having like kind of an elasticated definition that still keeps you within its boundaries overall, but doesn't say, okay, well, it's got to be 100% X. I think that's not a bad way to approach defining any genre. What do you think?
it reminds me, as a former mental health clinician, it reminds me of how we diagnose mental illness in a way that
Well,
is both useful and alarming. But no, I think I largely agree. There's something about like if it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, but also I guess there's also some genres that feel like they share some heartblood with each other, and I don't know, maybe we'd say that about noir and sword and
yes.
sorcery. So maybe you'd say it about no, that might only be my only lightning bolt right now, but and to the extent that you get the same feeling from a text, but the elements present are different. Like you probably don't have an eldritch horror in your noir, but if you do, I would like to read it.
Well, yeah, and I mean, even if it's not something as quite as obvious as whatever Cthulhu coming out of the closet and attacking you, it's this kind of thing of like narrative styles and whatnot. You read a lot of again the classic '30s, Conan stuff, and absolutely hard boiled style narration, kind of thing, and just the fact that that was a period when genre lines were not drawn quite as fiercely as they are now, and that's part of the thrill I think of reading those classics, and part of what I like about a lot of contemporary SNS I read, where people are trying to carry forward this thing of like sort of messy but functional thing where it's SNS, but you also know that it's not just like I don't know, trying to be exactly one thing. SNS is like the umbrella, but there's some stuff hanging off of it. Like one thing I think about a lot is horror, right? There's a lot of horror elements in classic SNS, and it's been interesting the last couple of years seeing horror publishers, uh, as a sort of side gig, as it were, doing some SNS. Outland put out Swords in the Shadows, edited by Cullen Bunn, an anthology of sword, sorcery, and horror, and then like Weird Punk Books, right? It's just come out recently with a couple of fun little things like Profane Altars, Profane Sorcery, the names of them. And again, thinking about like, all right, well, horror SNS, let's overlap these things. Let's come at it that way. How do you feel about horror and its role in the genre?
I mean, I love horror.
Yeah.
I mean, one genre conversation we don't want to get into is horror versus dark fantasy. We'll be here for days. I don't know. I see a lot of common ground, even to the point of it didn't even occur to me to mention it earlier because it's almost like intrinsic to a sword and sorcery approach for me.
I agree.
Yeah.
It's a core element.
And I think, I don't know, I think of horror as being something that invokes emotion and like a visceral emotion, and that being common to sword and sorcery as well, I think might be what another distinguishing factor between it and in more epic work. It's funny because it makes me want to, pull out different examples that are barely hanging on to the genre and compare them with each other. But it's I don't know. I feel like that way lies foolishness. Because I often will enjoy both of those, whatever the data points would be for that kind of an example. So I don't know. The benefit of having a strong genre thread in a book is, I think, just sort of giving the reader a through line. And we do that in different ways too. We do that with whenever you assemble a table of contents, like you're thinking about multiple things as you do that, like length of story or like emotional themes or larger motifs. And I think that when you're doing an anthology that hews around a genre, you're often thinking about it. What is the relationship of a given story with the genre, and then how does that relate to the next story that follows, and you kind of play that off each other. So the differences are both exciting, and then the similarities are great cartilage to hang on to for the next story.
Right on. All right, so just a quickie. I mean, you mentioned Delaney's work, but is there a favorite classic SNS character of yours? Amaro, I noticed, was one character who was mentioned in the blurb.
Yeah, I love Amaro. So, and I guess I don't know if this will get me in trouble too, but I would allege that Xena is a sword and sorcery lead figure as well.
I don't think that would get you in trouble at all. I see a lot of people who feel that way.
She's even more so than maybe part of it is because when we watched her, you often were considering Lucy Lawless versus Kevin Sorbo.
Especially in retrospect these days, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, let's not. I don't want to put on those goggles right now, but yeah, I don't know. The Xena narrative has always been one that both took several SNS tropes very seriously and just played them straight, and then it also had a handful that it subverted and or just completely forgot about in the heat of the moment, and that's been one that sort of stuck with me for a long time.
Yeah, I definitely think from episode to episode too, right? Like, I mean, sometimes if she's fighting the literal gods, you're like, okay, well, maybe that's a little different scale. But but then there's other ones where it's just like, Bruce Campbell's being annoying again. Like, I'm just like, okay, we're back to the human level.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, fair enough. Good choice, I think. So, okay, all right. I feel like I've been taking the long road to it, but I really wanted to give people a chance to get to know you better, get to know the press better, and get to know your feelings about the genre at large. You and I talked about this a little off mic, but for those who weren't there, what is the origin of Shatter the Sun, Queer Tales of Untold Adventure? Why this? Why now?
Sure. So this is an ongoing anthology series that I've been working on since, I guess, I became an anthologist. I've had a handful of outliers, but so this is like Queer Tales. series tends to look at different genres in succession and queer them up, make them messy, and put them all together. So previously I've done a urban fantasy anthology, anthology of post-apocalyptic work, a queer witches book, a mechs, and then the last one, like I was talking about before, was gothic horror, and now excited to get my hands messy with Sword and Sorcery.
Was there anything in particular that made you go like, all right, now we're going to do SNS? Or was there like a checklist you were kind of like working through of like, okay, this and Gothic and this? Or had you just watched Conan? Like, right, let's do this.
It was a reread of Neverion. So a lot of my anthologies have started because of an ongoing obsession with Samuel Delany. So this is no exception to that. And thinking about his spin off of like the barbarian hero just made me want to offer that up to just some of the great writers that are working now and see what folks do with it. I'd also just kind of gotten a few, I don't know, there's like little signs in other areas, like maybe you watch Conan again, you get some submissions from a different project that get you back in the mood for the genre. You hear about other people who are working in the genre being excited about it. So it all just sort of came together, and now's the time.
Awesome. I know that you're opening for submissions November 1st, and you mentioned earlier about how you like to have a few core, commission stories as well. Roughly, what's like the size and shape of this thing going to be? Do you have a plan for like 20 stories, or what's it going to look like? And will there be interior?
Yeah, so I'm a sucker for art. So one of my on frequent collaborators, Matthew Spencer, is going to be on board to do illustrations for the book. At the minimum, my plan is for him to do like a key weapon or artifact from each of the stories he'll be illustrating, and we'll use that in the story art in some fashion, and then as a stretch goal, we'll do something else. We're kicking around now what that might be, whether it's just like a scene from the story, or I also have this idea of maybe it being more like a travel illustration of the place, or sort of like a more ephemera type, like a sketced out map of something.
I was about to say, will it be a map? Will it be a fantasy map? Or we can
it'd be a whole bunch of things. So it's sort of a thing in motion. But I love art. I love working with Matt Spencer, so that's definitely happening. Just the funding will decide to what extent that I get to run amok with that concept. And then lengthwise, I don't know. In the past, like my books are usually around like 20 to 25 stories. I was saying this one might be shorter because I think Sword and Sorcery often benefits from being a little longer. So I am expecting I'll include more stories at the high end of my range than previously. So somewhere in the like 12 to 15 is probably the case. But I love Flash. So if someone gives me a perfect Flash story in the genre, then I'll be happy to include that too. And I've got someone writing a story game for it, and I've got some poetry from a writer, and at least one comic as well.
I'm 99% certain I know the answer, but just for anybody listening who's not sure, when you say story game, do you mean like, we're not going to say that's literally what you're doing, because I know that the company is very litigious, but choosable path adventure, choose your own.
That's funny. No, it's not. It's more like a tabletop RPG. This one's there's a trend lately for solo tabletop RPGs that often involve either cards or prompt based. There's a really big one that is incredible if you want to to test out the genre. It's called 1,000-Year-Old Vampire.
Uh-huh.
And you'll be really impressed at the depth of meaning and just, I don't know. It's a really cool trend, and I can't wait to see what this one's being designed by Sharing Biswas, who has done a bunch of cool games and also stories that we've been able to publish of his before. So I'm looking forward to his take on that genre.
Awesome. And poetry, that sounds pretty cool too. I like that poetry has kind of been part of the genre since the beginning. You know, again, good old Robert E. Howard, but many other authors have woven that into their Sword and Sorcery. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, these ones, I was at a writing retreat with a handful of other sci-fi fantasy writers and learned that a writer I admire, Alex Beckett, was also a poet, and I had just sort of not realized that about them, and I planted the seed of, you know, if you wrote some Sword and Sorcery poems, I'd be really delighted to read them. And then they sent them over this past summer, and they're perfect. Now I just have to figure out which ones to pick from the ones that I've been given based off of the other stories that come in.
Okay, cool. Well, so let's make sure people don't miss the plug. So the crowdfund launches November 1st, right?
No, so submissions are November 1st, but the crowdfund is middle of October, and then we'll run until middle of November.
Oh, shit. Well, I'm glad I asked.
Yeah.
Because I was thinking, all right, okay. Well, that's cool, too, because I was kind of wondering about the opening submissions, same day as the crowdfund, but this makes a lot more sense to me.
Yeah, it feels a little bit better to open submissions after you know something has been funded, so halfway through, I imagine, will be either funded or close to, so it feels a little bit safer to say, send me your stories.
Well, heck, I mean, as we record this, it is October 10th, so what date will it be launching?
I think we're on the 15th. I am flying by the seat of my pants a little bit still. I have to finish making the video this weekend, but yeah.
Oh, that's fun. Every single time I swear I won't do it the night before, and every time. It's like 11. I'm like, where do I find Creative Commons music for the thing?
I just found my song, I think. So that's one thing checked off. And of course, I'm listening to it, I'm really enjoying it, and then I looked at the name and it's like a dark hero emerges or something really tacky like that. And I was like, well, it's on brand. It's great.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah. You're not gonna put that song name like superimposed over the screen or something.
No, yeah. I just felt like the composer of the song had my number, is all I'm saying.
Oh yeah. No, for sure. Awesome. Okay, so folks, I will link to that in the show description. Also, if you're like, I'm not clicking on no show description, of course you can go to Kickstarter, Shatter the Sun, Rare Tales of Untold Adventure. I'll assume it's the only anthology by that title on Kickstarter.
Fingers crossed.
And I'm assuming there'll probably be a link at, I want to say, I'm sorry, I'm tired, folks, neonhemlock.com, or is there a dash? Am I messing it up?
No, you got it. Yeah, neonhemlock.com.
Awesome. All right, so there you go, neonhemlock.com. Go to Kickstarter to search for Shatter the Sun, or just for heaven's sakes, go to the description. I dare you to go to the description of this podcast episode and click the link. And whenever I put this up, you can. There's already a sign up page, so you can sign up to be alerted when the thing launches, or maybe it's already live and you can go in, or maybe you're listening to this like 7 months from now. That's cool too, because the link will take you to the campaign, and the campaign will have a button saying "Buy the book." So
it's true. It's true.
Yeah, you can't lose. I've had people say to me, "Oh, well, like it's been a while since the crowdfund. I guess there's no purpose in it." I'm like, no, it works. It'll still, it'll take you to what you want. So you cannot lose. Click the link in the description, and then all those other fun things I said. So before we go, is there anything at all else about the project, like any fun stretch goals you were considering, or just anything at all that we haven't covered that you'd like to share?
Yeah, so maybe the only thing I'll say is I've been test driving a t-shirt design that I think will be amusing and encourage you to check it out.
All right, awesome. Okay. Well, I mean, Dave, this has been fun. It's always nice when I get to turn like little circles with faces or something else in them on Discord into a full-blown, real human, person. So yeah, this has been cool, man. I'm really glad you came by, and who knows, maybe we'll have a chance to do this again sometime.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
All right, man. And take care. So I'm Writing a Novel features original intro and outro music by Gloria Guns and is hosted by yours truly, Oliver Brackenbury. If you'd like to get in touch, please email us at soimwritinganovel@gmail.com. And please consider sharing the show with anybody who might like it, or checking out any of the other ways you can support the show by heading to soimwritinganovel.com/support the show, which has things like links to our Patreon, Coffee, and PayPal. Thanks for hanging out with me and Dave, and I'll see you soon.